up here a little bit. It has been a whole 2 weeks since I've sat down in front of this mic, and during that time, I have graded more papers than I can ever begin to describe to y'all. And so here we are, and I'm trying to warm up my brain in order to get back into the groove and do the kinds of things that are part of the delight, actually, of doing a podcast. Thank you all for joining me. You are listening to the Psych Monologues, and I am Dr. Ray Mitch, your host. And the Psych Monologues, for those of you who might be trying out something new by listening to us, is a podcast devoted to exploring our journey toward wholeness within ourselves and our relationships with each other and with God, and learning to live in truth and grace. And so my attempt in initiating and launching this podcast ultimately was, originally I should say, was actually to try to meet a need amongst students that I had that were graduating, and we were in the midst of the initial phases of a pandemic and going through a lot of grief and loss. So it seemed like a reasonable way to begin kind of working through some of those issues and talking about those issues. And it certainly seemed to be the kind of thing that would resonate with a lot of people, not just the students that are subjected to me in class every day. So here we are. Welcome to January 3rd. We are starting our season 2, which sounds really official. But we have a total of 46 episodes to our credit. I am absolutely stunned and amazed that I have lasted this long. Now, you might say, well, that's having pretty low expectations. And I would say, yep, I do. I didn't know how long it was going to be, and I really didn't think that it was going to be a long-term thing. But as I said, here I am, and I'm willing to embark in a new season for a new year in 2021. So what I have want to do is continue where we left off. And before I do, though, I want to ask a question just to get whoever's listening thinking. And the question is this: have you ever heard of a cairn? Cairn is spelled C-A-I-R-N. And if you've hiked the mountains before, you would probably be familiar with this term, because cairns mark where the path is. And we have been talking about how to go about accepting grace. And in that context, we were talking also about old country, new country kinds of things. And it occurred to me as I was getting ready and kind of wrapping my brain around what I wanted to talk about tonight, that cairns were a great example of what we are actually talking about in terms of this journey toward embracing and accepting the grace that is given us. So cairns are what I'm going to begin to use as a way of understanding, because when we talked about the old country and the new, a lot of times we end up finding ourselves wanting to go on this journey toward the new country where grace is accepted, and we begin to make choices and things of that sort in our relationships and so forth. But we also find that it gets so uncomfortable that we go racing back to the old country. So that journey between the new and the old, or the old and the new, is usually marked by a variety of cairns along the way that help us to begin to think about or stay on the journey, not think about, but stay on the journey. And so cairns are used, actually they're often referred to, at least in Scripture, as monuments, or they will erect a altar in a lot of cases. And what you find is it marks a time when something significant happens. So, for example, early in Scripture, Abram, who later became Abraham, saved his nephew Lot from the burning cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, and they decided that the groups of men and sheep and livestock. Yep, I really need to warm up. and livestock that they had got so big that the land couldn't sustain them both. So they got to a point to say, look, we need to part company. And so Lot, you choose. Abram was kind, and he kind of stepped back and let his nephew choose the country. And actually, the more I think about this was actually before Sodom and Gomorrah. So they parted company. Lot headed off toward the valley of where Sodom and Gomorrah were, and Abraham took the opposite way. And one of the things that they did was they built a cairn. And they built a thing that said, an altar, if you want to use that word, that said, we are parting company. This is where the property stops between us. It's a boundary line. And so they parted company. And that's just one example in Scripture. There are lots of examples. Another one is when the Israelites actually leave Egypt, finally get their act together and get finally to a point where they can cross the Jordan River. And when they do, they take stones out of the river, dry riverbed, because God not only parted the Red Sea, if you buy into that, which I do. So he parted the Red Sea, and they passed over dry land to be able to get away from the Egyptians. And then he parted the river Jordan again for them to cross over into the Promised Land. And as they were crossing, they picked up stones. And when they got to the other side, all the way across, all the Israelites and all the people that were with them, they piled the stones one on top of another as an indication of where they were on their journey. And so cairns are a very significant item. And if you place it in the biblical context, I can give you another example of this. Actually, it's a ministry, not really a ministry, but an organization that works with kids that are grieving. And one of the things they do with the kids to mark their journey through grief is to build cairns. They're not real big. They're a few stones, but they're held together, and then the kids can take it as a marker of having passed through their grief and being able to come out on the other side. So cairns are a significant thing, and certainly hiking in the mountains, that's another example of marking where the path is. And that's what I want to try to draw off of as we're talking about going from the old country to the new. And so where we left off last year, it was December 20th, we were talking about accepting grace. And the biggest challenge or question I get is the question, how? And actually, in some respects, that's the worst possible question to ask, because how tends to betray what we think the path is to get there. In other words, give me the steps, tell me all the right things to do, I will do them all, and then I will make it through my journey. I will be able to do this well, and I will finally get to a point wherever that point is of accepting grace, and everything will be good. I will be free. I will be able to do this for the rest of my life. Yeah. Well, my reaction to that is good luck. The thing about it is that we demand an answer to the question how, because we don't trust being able to take the journey along the way, trusting our guide. And our guide is not only our heart and the Holy Spirit within us, but it's also the people that we've locked arms with to take this journey as well. And so we talked a little bit about this, and the thing that I pointed out is probably the first and hardest cairn to actually get to is the one that expects us, or it is the process of accepting our brokenness. And that's the hardest part of the journey, right? I mean, we start out, I went on a backpacking trip with my father-in-law many, you get the idea, years ago. And we went to a place called Isle Royale. And it's 6-hour boat trip out to the island in the middle of Lake Superior. And we did a backpacking trip for a few days. And literally the first day, you walk out and you're feeling great and you've got it all together and you're sure you can manage to get to the first point of your journey. And the problem that I didn't see coming was that we had to cross 5 different ridges before we actually got to the next place where fresh water was. And the problem with those ridges is there's always a valley before you get to that ridge. And in that valley usually was bog or moisture of some sort. And if you know anything about Lake Superior and up in that neck of the woods, you will know about black flies and mosquitoes. And they grow mosquitoes that are big enough to take away your firstborn child. They're just massive. And we had to go through this walking along planks across this bog. And it was feast time for the mosquitoes. I mean, I just got eaten alive. And we had to do that 5 different times. We finally got to the point where we got to our destination. So we were feeling really good at the beginning. But then each ridge we crossed, I started realizing I'm losing ground. And in a lot of ways, that was very much like being able to get to the point to accept our own brokenness, because it is a massive first hurdle to get over. Because usually our concern is that if I accept my brokenness, I will never improve. I will just stay here. Nothing will ever get any better. Now, I think and back during this, and I'm doing some review because I realize that a lot of people haven't heard it, but in the last episode, I talked a little bit about kintsugi, which is an ancient Japanese art form that takes broken pottery and binds it all together and puts it back together using a lacquer that has fine metal in it, usually gold. So by the time the broken pottery is put back together, it is actually more valuable than it was completely intact. And that's a picture of what brokenness is that we need to begin to embrace. Now, the other thing that I mentioned last time was that we need to be sure and understand that there is a distinction between kinds of brokenness. There's brokenness that comes as a result of damage or neglect or trauma. And this stuff is bad. It is bad, of course, and it needs repair. And I've been in this business for almost 40 years, over 40 years now, and talking to people and trying to repair the brokenness that has occurred because of somebody else's sin toward them, on them, and the evil that has been perpetrated against other people. And this brokenness needs to be repaired and healed and restored, just like kintsugi in a lot of ways. Because what comes out on the other end is something way, way more valuable, if you want to call it that, and beautiful than what it was when it was broken. And we're sure that if we embrace this brokenness, we will remain damaged goods forever. And so there is a brokenness that occurs that is a result of damage, and we need to do whatever is necessary to recover, to restore, to be healed in that. There is another kind of brokenness, though, and that brokenness is what comes from growth and development. And our problem is our tendency is to conflate all pain is bad. And so any pain that occurs as a result of the brokenness that comes from growth and development is that is equally as bad as brokenness that comes from damage or trauma or things like that. Now, I think that it has to be said, it feels that way, but it's important to make this distinction so that we can know what we are embracing and what we're trying to move toward. So ultimately, what we have to do then, if we're going to embrace this brokenness that comes from growth and development, and it's never that clean, it's mixed together. It always is mixed together. That the brokenness that comes as a result of sin, whether it's my own and my own choices or somebody else's, but also it comes from growth. And a lot of times we'll be going through things and we'll say, nothing's happening. I'm not getting anywhere. This is awful. And it needs to stop. And that's understandable. I mean, and oftentimes we're straining our eyes for some cairn that would indicate that we're improving, that we can actually see it. The problem is that when we're embracing our brokenness, because it's so counterintuitive to actually the healing process, that we have occluded vision. We have cloudy vision of the kinds of changes that we're looking for, because the changes we typically are looking for is everything goes back to quote unquote normal, whatever that is, and we're all better and everything's fine and I'm never feeling. The funny thing about it is what we defined as normal before that never was that. Everything was fine. We get back to normal, all of that. So we have to meet our flaws, our mistakes, our shortcomings, our limitations with grace and truth, but truth understood correctly, not truth to beat the snot out of ourselves, to say, pull yourself up by your bootstraps, get going, and everything will be better. It's not that kind of truth we're talking about. The other thing about this, the other thing about this is that we have to learn how to live with ambiguity and uncertainty. And this, for a lot of people, myself included, this is a fate worse than death. Why do I say that? Well, all I have to do is watch people's behavior. We hate uncertainty. As a matter of fact, we hate it so much, we will fabricate something to make things more certain so that we can manage our uncertainty, our anxiety around that. And clarity is one of them. I mean, we demand clarity as a solution to our uncertainty. The problem is that if I actually had that clarity, I wouldn't need to trust anybody, including God in my life and where he's leading me and what he's taking me through and all those sorts of things. So if you're interested in kind of the other cairns along the way and what I've been talking about with this, I would refer you back to episode 46 because we talked a little bit more about this. But there are 3 more that I want to pay attention to, and I may not be able to get all the way through these since I'm trying to cap our podcast here at about 25 minutes or give or take. So I may have to just take a couple of these. But so the first thing, and again, the other thing to keep in mind is that when we're talking about old country and new country, that metaphor speaks loads, right? I mean, if you go to a new country and they're talking a different language, they're doing things very differently, all the relationships there are very different, and the words that they use and the idioms that they use and the jokes that they do, all of that, oftentimes we will turn around and head back because it's like, I can't do this. I can't even communicate to somebody. And that same thing is what I see with people that are trying to learn how to accept grace. So I looked at 3 different things in terms of that, in terms of seeing things as black and white and as something being familiar, which is good, and unfamiliar and uncomfortable being bad, all of those things. So the next one I want to talk about is knowing the rules of relating versus being unsure of the rules of relating, and that's part of the old country, new country. In the old country, where it's driven by shame, it's driven by law. In other words, you do some things and you don't do others. And if you don't do others, then you should be ashamed of yourself. As a matter of fact, you have just condemned yourself. So in the old country, I know all the rules as how to relate. I know how to do this dance. I know how to manage other people's perceptions of me. I know how to handle myself. I know when to shut up and when to say things. And I know exactly what to say at that particular point in time so that what? People won't think that ... just fill in the blank. They won't think that I'm insensitive. They won't think that I'm stupid. They won't think that I don't know what I'm talking about. They won't have any respect for me. The list goes on and on. And see, these rules of relating in the old country are set in such a way for one main goal. You know what it is? It's safety. And so we abide by the rules of the road. And in military terms, we talk about it as rules of engagement. And so I know the rules in the old country. I can handle those. I will do all of those things, and I will survive, and I will be safe. Safe in an emotional sense, maybe even safe in a physical sense. And that's usually where we learn some of this stuff, is that there's some part of this that is related to even our survival, emotional, physical, etc. So on the one hand, in the old country, I know exactly how to handle myself. I know the rules of relating. In the new country, I pursue and begin to move toward what it looks like to actually live and accept grace that's offered me. The rules of relating it's almost like being in an upside down world. And I've used this metaphor before, and it's like being in an upside down world. Everything that's right is wrong. Everything that's wrong is right. Everything that is good is bad, and etc. It's all this stuff that's reversed. So instead of embracing the idea that I have to manage other people's perceptions of me, I allow them and this is all within the context of accepting grace, which is ironic because when I say I allow them the freedom to think what they want, most people that I ask is, can you control what other people think? And most sane people will say, and underline sane, they'll say, well, no, I can't control what other people think. But if you watch how we interact with people and how much time we spend managing their perceptions of us, which we assume we know, then what we'd say is our behavior doesn't match what we say we believe, because it looks like I think I can. I think I can manage how people perceive me. So the new rules of the road are allowing people the freedom to think what they want, which also includes the freedom for me to say what is true within myself, in my relationships with people, or even in my relationship with God. I said this to somebody just recently, and Dr. Larry Crabb, who's been connected with CCU for many, many years, often has said that God is only as real to me as I am to him. Now, that doesn't mean I'm limiting God. God's got all the power he needs. But God also limits himself according to my need, because that's what a loving God does. He doesn't blow me away with his omnipotence. He meets me where I'm at. And so ultimately, when I allow myself the freedom to be real, and again, and I keep qualifying these things because it's really important, because I don't say, heavy, deep, and real stuff with people that I don't know are trustworthy. That's dumb. But I need to, with the people that I know to be trustworthy, who are safe people, then I need to begin to practice this idea of relating freely and allowing them to relate freely with me, and living in the space, what I call the space between us, rather than the space between my ears. Because I can create all kinds of dialogues in my head between the important people in my life. Well, I'm going to say this, and then they'll say that, and I don't want them to say that, so I'm going to change what I say, and then. So the uncertainty that surrounds how I go about relating really binds us up and ties us up in 1,000 little knots. Oftentimes what ends up happening is people go silent. And you know why? When they're pressed, when I ask why, they say, because I don't want to make a mistake. And so our perfectionism starts showing its ugly head. And I don't want to make a mistake, so I don't say anything. And then nothing happens. And I feel more alone and disconnected. And see, the funny thing about it is we bring the rules of the old country into, and all of the ways we handle ourselves and how we relate to people, we bring that with us into the new country. And our first attempt to try to engage people in the new country, all of these people are people that are trying to live accepting the grace that's offered them and the freedom that is offered them. We use old strategies in a new place. It makes sense. It's normal. We all do it. But then when it doesn't work, we say, well, I'm not going to do anything at all. And which leads us back to one of the things that I mentioned last time in terms of black and white thinking versus gray thinking. I mean, thinking that allows for differences and changes and things of that sort. So that's one of the Cairns, if you will, the things that we bring with us into the differences between living by shame and law versus living by grace and freedom. The last one I'm going to talk about tonight is emphasizing objective reality as part of the old country. And it's the most annoying phrase in all of English language, which is my own pet peeve. I'll admit it is. But when I hear people say, well, it is what it is, well, thank you, Sherlock. I got that figured out. But it ends up being a punctuation point toward any further thinking about it. And so the old country phrase is, it is what it is. And we live by how things should be, not what they are, but how things should be. And it emphasizes objective reality because everybody can agree on their objective reality. The funny thing about it is that if I emphasize that, I move away from what it means to me and how I actually feel about it. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm a counselor. I'm going to emphasize how you really feel, all that kind of crap. That's not what I'm saying. But we hide behind the embrace of objective reality to avoid the subjective reality of what's going on in our own hearts. And that is where connection thrives, is based on the very thing that scares us for someone else to know. We have a hard enough time with it. Heaven forbid that somebody else would know it and then they would do what we do to it, which is usually condemn ourselves. So in the old country, it's an emphasis on objective reality. In the new country, as I begin to move into the new country, there's an emphasis on all reality, not just objective, but all reality, the spiritual, the emotional, the intellectual, the interpersonal realities, which cannot be solely objectified because there are spirit beings that are embodied, that are interacting with one another. And there is a reality to that too, which is fine. But in the new country, we emphasize or live within all of reality. In other words, there are plenty of things I don't know. As a matter of fact, there are plenty of things that I don't know them, which sounds a little confusing. But you think for a while and it'll come to you. So it deals with not only what was, which is static. Once it's occurred, it's not going to change what was. It deals with what is, and it also deals with what could be without demanding it or turning it into what should be. Because should is always related to shame, and should means I've done something wrong, generally. And then it leads to an emphasis on all of reality, leads to an acceptance of what is. And not adding anything. Yeah, but that's not how it should be, or it should be better than that, or it is what it is, whatever. I mean, it's all of those things that are really a part of this. So the old country emphasizes the disconnection from all of us with the reality that we live in, and emphasizes only the objective reality because it's safe. And I don't need to deal with or dig into more about what does it actually mean to me, which I mentioned that earlier. What does it actually mean to me? What does it mean to me in the world that I'm in and the way that I relate and all the things that I bring with me into it? Because of what? That's really messy. And the new country has a certain level of mess and unpredictability and uncertainty that most of us hate, which means the path between the old country and the new country gets really, really well worn. We get there, say, this ain't working today. I'm out, tap, I'm out, and I'm got my track shoes on. I'm on my way to the old country again, where it's comfortable and it's known. And I don't feel stupid because I say something wrong, which, of course, that saying something wrong is always by my measure, not by anybody else's, because people in the new country, when I say something, quote unquote, that I think is wrong, usually offer me the grace and say, I get it. I understand. Me too. I put my foot in my mouth on a regular basis. It's amazing that I don't eat more leather. So the new country, there's a lot. I mean, even when I describe this, I think, why in the world would I ever want to go to the new country? Really? I mean, realistically. But I know that freedom and grace are waiting for me, and I know that the way I'm doing things is not a real good way to handle things. It really isn't. And I'll be the first to admit that, the objective reality thing. But I know that I want something better, and here we sit, third day into the new year, and people are considering, well, what do I want? How do I want things to be different? Ultimately, if they're different, we assume that they're better, but they may not. But they'll be different. And see, that's a big portion, I think, of what we have to grapple with here. So moving into this new country where grace and freedom can be found comes with liabilities, and we need to understand them clearly enough so that we go in clear-eyed and willing to tolerate what comes with this thing we call grace. Because once I begin to acclimate and I begin to figure out how to live freely, which is funny, right? I mean, we talk a lot about freedom, and it's like I have to learn how to live free without all the extra internal narratives and shame and all the other things that I use to rein in my behavior or punish myself for not doing it right or whatever that might be. And so it's not easy. It is far from easy. As a matter of fact, it will take a lifetime to embrace. And again, I know that's not a real great ringing endorsement for going to the new country, but the relationships that are built there are built on freedom. And when someone looks you in the eye and says, I love you and I will journey with you, you know it's true. In the old country, it could be simply a platitude, and that's the thing to say rather than any reality being behind it. And we've had it proven to us over and over and over again. So there's at least a couple of them. I will continue on. I'll tag on, I will add on the one that I was going to cover tonight into the next episode. Keeps you hanging, coming back for more. But those are the two, knowing the rules of relating versus the uncertainty of the rules of relating, emphasizing objective reality versus emphasizing all of reality, including the contours of our own hearts and how we engage them, and accepting what is without resignation and moving toward that. So that's it for tonight. some program reminders, which I make every episode, is that if what I'm talking about is touching something in you that you say, oh man, either it's uncomfortable, but I want to understand and learn more, or I really want to hear more about this, then please subscribe. Subscribe on the website at drmitch.com. If you're listening for the first time, it's MITSCH, not MITCH. So drmitch.com, upper right-hand corner of the website, you can subscribe, and any new materials or content that comes up along the way during this year, you will be notified that something new is on the website, and you can visit it, and you can be notified that something is there, and you can go back and look at it. You can also subscribe to the Instagram. We're on Instagram at the Psych Monologues, all one word, lowercase, or on Twitter at Ray Mitch, and Facebook, Ray.Mitch, and LinkedIn, drmitch, are all of the social media platforms that the material and other things are getting pushed out to. You can also subscribe at Podbean, which is the host of our podcast, and that's raymitch.podbean.com. They have a player. But if you don't want to do that, you don't want to mess with it, actually, I have even more options available to you, because you can hear the podcast on Spotify, on Stitcher, on iTunes, Podbean, Amazon Music, and most recently, we just got it added to iHeart, iHeart.com and iHeart Music. So you can find us in a variety of places, whatever's most convenient. Please be sure to check me out and check out the things I'm talking about, and join the community that is slowly but surely beginning to build around this idea of living with grace and truth, and living with freedom, and ultimately trust. The last thing I want to mention, which I've mentioned every time, is that if there are things you're hearing and you want to get some participation in it, or you want to partner with us, I am continuing to grow and invite people to be partner with us in growing a scholarship fund for CCU students to participate in a silent retreat that I lead along with my friend and colleague, Dr. Bill Saxby, twice a year. We do one in the fall, we do one in the spring, and we have one coming up here in April 8th through the 11th, and that's primarily for college students right now. And we really need to build the scholarship fund to make it possible for students that can't afford it to be able to go. And so I encourage people that if they are interested, or they know somebody who is very much invested in spiritual formation and things of that sort, then to send them to our GoFundMe site. It can be found on the website at drmitch.com. Click on the CCU tab. It will take you down to Silent Retreats, and you'll see the actual GoFundMe site, and to contribute to be able to make this possible for college students who want to participate in a very unique way of connecting with God and knowing His heart and knowing their own hearts better. So that's it for tonight. Thanks so much for joining me. I am looking forward to this year and more topics that I can walk through and talk about and comment on along the way. We will be finishing this Accepting Grace series, if you will, and then we will move on to what it looks like to live free, which is another key aspect that I have people asking me about all the time. So that's the tentative schedule for probably the next 4 to 5 weeks, and then we'll move on to some other hot topic to make people uncomfortable or actually encourage them, whichever you prefer. So, as always, thanks so much for joining me. Love ya. Later. Bye.